Hi and welcome to another Photoshop tutorial. This is Steve, and in this video we're going to talk about how to remove the background of an image. And for this example we're going to be using this husky dog with all this hair, and this should work as a good example because hair is one of the biggest challenges. And if this feels intimidating to you or overwhelming or you've tried it before, I totally understand because it took me quite a few tries to get this dialed. But I'm going to show you a pain-free way to do this, pretty much regardless of what your Photoshop setup is. Okay, so let's dive right in. Now there are a couple of ways that you can do this, but it basically involves making a selection, a rough selection of your subject, and then using the Refine Edge tool to dial it in and just make it better. And I want to give you a kind of sense of how to look at images and edges to determine whether they're going to be easy or hard. And so when we're looking at this dog image, if you look down here, this is the best example. Along this edge here, where it's a really nice contrast between the kind of pale background and the dark fur, this is going to be an easy section to do with the Refine Edge tool. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. When you get up into this area here where this white and this brown kind of blend a little bit with the background, and in here this gray, and then this gray along here that kind of blends into the background, you're going to see that it's a little bit trickier. But I'll show you how to kind of work back and forth between those two, okay? And keep in mind that in the old days, you'd have to create a customized brush to add in some brush textures, and some people still do that, and it's actually really effective, but you can basically cheat and get around that now with some of the tools that Photoshop has. So without further ado, let's dive right in and we'll talk about this. So there are two main ways to make your rough selection. One is with the quick selection tool, and that's this guy right here. And if you do your drop down menu, this guy right here, it's also selected by hitting W on your keyboard. So we click on this, and then we have our tool. You can make it bigger by pushing the right square bracket on your keyboard. Just make it nice and big. And then you click and drag over your subject until you have a good rough selection. It's good to go in and get a little bit more detailed on some of these areas like this, and especially this one. And you'll notice because these are similar in hue, it wants to grab all of that, but that's okay. You just hit Alt or Option on a Mac and deselect that, and then you can work back and forth just a little bit to get a decent selection. You might want to go down here and deselect this little corner. Not the end of the world. You're really just trying to get a rough selection. Oh, we want to get these this hair in here. Okay, so that's pretty good, and that's really all that's necessary. And then you'll go to the next step of doing the refining. And this is where I've always gotten hung up, but it's okay. I'm going to walk you through it, and I'm going to show you some of the pitfalls and, more importantly, some of the real advantages to this technique. But before I do that, for those of you who have a new updated version of Photoshop CC, you do have the option of using the object selection tool as well. Okay, so let me select that and show you how to do that really quick. It's not really that much different, but I'll show you. So I'm going to go Control D to deselect what I just did. And the object selection tool basically has two modes. You can use a lasso tool where you just draw around it, or you can use a rectangle tool. And I have found that they're fairly similar, unless you have a really complex image where you might want to select various areas on your image. You can mostly just take the rectangle tool and go a little bit off your screen and go all the way over. Make sure you get the hair right here all in there. Go all the way, cover your guy, and then release. It'll think for a minute, and then you see that it went in, and it basically selected the same thing that I did with the quick selection tool. With the exception of this right here, and if I want to add to that, I can just go to my lasso tool. Make sure you select it on these overlapping squares, which is the add, and then I can just go and lasso this guy in, and we add that to it. Maybe a little bit more right there. So again, we basically have the same selection. Oop, maybe a little bit right here because I like that little white tuft of hair. Okay, but we basically have the same selection. Now we get to the fun and important part, which is the select and mask part. So here's the tricky part. If you are selected on the move tool, for instance, you're not going to see the right tool up here. You have to be selected on one of the selection tools. It doesn't even matter. You can be selected on the lasso tool, and that will bring up in your option menu the select and mask button. Really important to be able to see that. Or if you're not selected on a selection tool, you can go to the selection up here and go to select and mask here. Regardless, whenever you click this or you click it up in your option menu, it's going to bring up this whole new set of tools and screens and everything. One of them is this properties window, and let me see if I can drag this in over here to make it a little easier to see. I'm just going to put it right there just to make this easier to see. So we have some tools in the toolbar down the side that we'll talk about, and then we have your properties here. And most of this stuff you don't have to worry about just yet, but what we're going to focus on is your view. So you can see it flashed this red in the background, right? And you can see the line along where the red contrasts with our hair. And that's just to show you where your selection is currently. And you can adjust your opacity so that the contrast is stronger or softer, depending on whether you want to see the background or the foreground. And that's helpful. I usually leave it somewhere between 60 and 70 to start with, and then I'll turn it up to 100% every once in a while. And then you can also do different overlays to see where the contrast is, and different overlays help in different ways. So usually before I do the overlays, I'll crank it up to 100% so you can see what I'm talking about. So our background is just masked off in red right now. You can do a bunch of these, but I'll just show you the ones I use the most. Black. So that shows you, if you were to cut this out exactly as it is right now and paste it on a black background, that's what you would get, which is a pretty crappy selection, right? It looks like somebody did a hack job. So that's really helpful, or you can do it on white. Kind of the same there. It looks better on white, but still looks very choppy, and the hair is very not realistic looking. So let's go back to our red, because that is one of the easiest ways to do it. And you have to click off of this to get it to go away. I'll dial the opacity down a little bit again. And then let's go do the magic. And this is really the coolest part. It's the Refine Edge tool. And I'll hover over this for a second. Oh, I thought it would show me the tooltip, but it didn't. There it is, the Refine Edge brush tool. You can hit the R on your keyboard, and you will be toggling back and forth between this and the zoom and the hand tool and the brush tool even to do some refinements to this. So it's good to know the shortcuts. So that's R, the brush tool is B, the zoom is Z, okay? So let's hit R to get into our Refine Edge brush tool. And here's what you do. First of all, you're going to get the size kind of to a comfortable size. And this is pretty good right now. You could go a little bigger with you if you wanted. You could go a little smaller if you wanted. But what the Refine Edge brush tool does is it basically tries to look for pixels out here on the edge that match what's happening in here. And it's a little hard to get your brain around. I know that I struggled with it, but you sort of just have to trust the tool and play with it to get a sense of how it will work and where it will work and where its shortcomings are. And the best way to do this is to get about 5 different photos with different backgrounds and just use this tool. Like, trust me, just make a rough selection and then start using this tool on different images. Find somebody with frizzy hair, find somebody with wavy hair, find an animal with a really blurry background, try a few different things, and you'll start to see how it works. Once you do that, then you can kind of adjust your workflow to fit. And to give you a really good example, let's just start right down here at the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom. So unfortunately, you can't hit the Alt and scroll zoom when you're in this tool, which drives me a little crazy. So you have to go hit the Z key and click on your zoom. But that's okay, it still works. I'm going to zoom into about there. And then you can also use the hand tool by pressing the space bar, and you can move it around. So let's just move this into the center. Now we got a good zoom going, and we're in our refining edge brush tool, and then you just start brushing right along this seam. And what we're doing, and you'll just see what happens. As I brush a little bit, see what happened? It moved the edge into these gaps, like filled in the white background with the overlay, or masked it off basically. And then as I brush over the tips of these, you can't see that as well, but well, here's a good one. This red one right here, as I brush over it, you'll see the color, the black, come into it. Okay, so this is just a smart tool that can really help you do this. And I'm going to kind of brush over all of this out onto the tips of these. This is why it's good to have a little bit of transparency to it so you can see what's going on. And then what you'll notice too is it'll look a little funny until you release the mouse, and then it usually looks a little bit better. So again, push the space bar and I can grab the hand and move it around. And you'll see this stuff works really well on the black contrast, but when I get up into here, it gets a little trickier because it doesn't recognize what's background and what's foreground. So you just kind of, on this part, you have to do your best. But see how like there's some red showing through the hair right here, which is probably solid hair. This is where I would probably take the brush tool, I'd hit B, and I would actually add some of that back in and see how I get that white, that stark white back again, which is his hair. Okay, so then we go back to R for our refining edge tool, and I'm just going to go along the edge. And again, when we get into this hair, it's going to be a little trickier. That's working so far, not too bad. You'll see some little gaps and strays there though, which is very annoying, but you just have to work with that. Keep in mind, this is a tool. It's not just like a magic bullet, but it's darn close, and it's a lot better than the old days of like creating your own hairbrushes. So you can go over things a couple times if you need to. See how we're starting to get quite a bit of definition though in the hair. And again, like maybe you don't like this much, so you kind of go back over it and see if you can get it right. And then sometimes what I'll do is I'll just get rid of some of this if I have to, and that's okay. And what you can do is hit the Alt key to get rid of the selection and just undo it. And so we lose some of that definition in that hair, but maybe that's the sacrifice that we need to make, like something like that. You know, you can kind of play with it back and forth. Do the positive to add it in, do the negative to take it out, and just kind of see what you can do. And then again, using the space bar to grab the hand tool and get everything centered. And then the rest of this is pretty straightforward, but you can see it's taking out that background and it's adding in the detail of our fur. Just almost like magic. We'll continue working down this. Make sure you go out a little further to get those hairs. Working down this way. And then again, when we get into this part, it gets a little trickier again, because this blends in so much with the background that Photoshop just does not know where the edge is. But you still try it and do your best along here. And sometimes you kind of get lucky. I mean, that's not horrible. It's not good either. But we can try it through here. And then again, we'll work back in with our brush tool a little bit, because I don't want any of that. I don't want it to be transparent through down through here. So we'll work back into there and then just kind of let some of those little stray hairs be there, and that's okay. You can also hit the Alt key. Like, we just don't want this fuzz here. That's not hair, that's just fuzz. So hit the Alt key with the brush and I can actually just erase that stuff out like that. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. I'm gonna hit one little spot here to get that to stay white. Maybe even a couple in through here. Maybe even a little bit along there. That might have been too much. Control Z. Okay, so now we can click our zoom key, Alt, and zoom back out a little bit and see what we've got. And that looks pretty decent. Again, we could mess with this some more right here and kind of try and figure out a solution. In fact, maybe I could undo some of this, you know, take that out. Whoops, I meant Alt and undo some of this to kind of clean that up. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to move forward so you can see the end result. And so I can turn this up, you can see a little bit better the contrast. And then now is when you can go in here and you can put it on a different background. And this helps you preview what it's going to look like depending on where you put it. So on this one, for instance, you see a little bit of hazing here, and this is a little bit hazy because of the lighting in the original. So maybe if you're putting this on a dark background, you'd want to move in different directions. If you're doing on a white background, for example, though, like that looks pretty good. Really, this spot here is still the issue. And, you know, in this case, I would probably take my brush tool and I would go in and I would just take a little bit of that out, just so it looked better. Something like that. If you need to get a little more tricky with it, you can. But just to clean it up. And then you've got your finished selection. And just to give you a contrast of what this looked when we started, you can hit this little button here that says Show Original. You got this really kind of blocky, low quality selection. And then you go to this and you've got like hair and tendrils and, you know, quite a bit of difference. So then what you have to do is you have to do something with this selection. And so you can do some more refining through here, but we're not going to mess with these. But what you have to do at this point is you have to output this to something. So you can either output it to a selection. In fact, I'll show you all these different options so you can get a sense of what they do. If I click OK, output to selection, it's just going to go back to my original layer and it's just going to create that selection. And then I can do whatever I want with it. So let's go ahead and go back to select and mask, and we'll look at another output version. You can do a layer mask. I'm not going to actually do all of these. You can do a new layer. Let's do a new layer because often that's what I will do. Go OK. And now it does a new layer with a transparent background. And this is very useful for a lot of things. You know, for example, if I just wanted to drop an image in here as a background, I just go to, I go to File and I go to Place Embedded. And I can just grab an image. Let's just go with a barn image. I can just expand this barn to make it nice and big. Make it the background. Click OK. And then drop that image behind this image. And now you've got our dog with that image behind it. And then the possibilities are endless. You can change the size of this, go Control-T to transform it, and shrink it down into the corner to make it a little more realistic in size. Click OK. You can edit the contrast or the colors of this to make it match the background a little bit more. You can go into your barn image and you can put a blur in the background. Go to Filter and Blur and Gaussian Blur, and you can make it as blurry or as not blurry as you want. Maybe you want something about there. That's kind of cool. It's almost like a dog food commercial. Click OK. And then you can even take that and go click the V key for your move tool, and you can grab that background image and move it however you like. In fact, we could bring this down a little closer to the dog like that, and then we could crop in on it. Just come down like this. Click OK. And there you've placed your dog into a different background. But that's how you use the select and mask. When you're in a selection tool, you make your selection, you go to select and mask, and then you do your refining brush tool to make a much better selection, especially when you're dealing with things like fur. So thanks for watching. I hope that that was helpful. My challenge to you is to take at least 3 to 5 images that are all different, But go in and make your rough selection, do your refine edge tool along the edge, and you will learn so much about the subtleties and nuances of what works and what doesn't, and it will help you to start looking for images or even composing images if you're a photographer in ways that makes them easier to edit. So that's my challenge to you. Thanks for watching. Have a great one, and I will see you in another video.